So for the next segment, I want to talk about why Christians care so much about sex. Now, I don't know why I have to say this every single time, but I feel that I will regret not doing it if I don't. Honestly, this is not all Christians. There are Christians who don't care. There are Christians who are actually reasonable about this subject. There are Christians who I consider friends who are very progressive on this subject. But I do want to point out that there are enough, especially where I live, where this conversation happens every day. So just know this is not a hasty generalization on Christians. This is talking about specific kinds, so if you personally want to be the Christian that types in the comment, well, I'm not like that, or my congregation isn't like that, good, awesome. Spread that kind of love. Spread that kind of mentality. But this is not that.
You're in a conversation and someone says, Christians are so hung up about sex. Why is it such a big deal to them? What would you say?
Well, I would say exactly what I said 10 seconds ago. Some Christians are. That is toxic. Not all Christians are. And the ones that aren't should be doing as good of a job as they can to promote that mentality in their religion.
Before you can know what you should do with something, you have to know what that something is for. For example, I used to love to look...
Oh, is this going to be... Okay, I think I know where this is going already, and I'm going to make a prediction. Bear in mind, I haven't seen this video. So, this is one that was recommended to me for me to see. I am viewing it here for the first time. I'm going to go ahead and take a guess that this is going to say something along the lines of, sex is made for having babies, therefore sex should only be used for having babies. If that's the case, well, this is going to be fun.
At the tools in my grandpa's garage, but he wouldn't let me just play with them however I wanted because he knew I might break them or something else or my...
If your child could break your tool, you bought a cheap tool. I'm kidding. I've actually broken my fair share of tools as a kid, so that's not really a fair point. Yes, teaching children how to use tools, like how to use things for their intended purpose, is a good thing to do. But bear in mind, as I learned during my renovation project on the house, not every tool designed for a specific job can only be used for that specific job. For instance, the tool in question here is a claw hammer. Now, this is for hammering in nails, removing nails, and or wanton destruction if need be. Would you like to know one of the other things I found that it's really useful for? When we were fixing the floor of our house, we had to remove the original subfloor. Now, our subfloor originally was built in a set of layers. The first subfloor was a layer of particle board with a layer of vinyl on top, and then a layer of plywood, which was the actual subfloor, and then a layer of thinner plywood on top as the float for the floor. Now, for anybody who's seen the extensive damage that was done to our house, thanks to water and pipes and all that fun stuff, when we went down there and started stripping out the floor, creating the 200-foot chasm that exists in our house at the moment, or not at the moment now, we fixed it now, but existed a handful of weeks ago, this claw hammer became incredibly useful. Not just for removing nails that the subfloor was pinned down with, it was pinned down with a mixture of nails and screws, but also we found that some of the subfloor had deteriorated so much that you couldn't get a screw out of it because the screw had been sunk down and the wood had swollen up above where the screw was, so it was basically enveloped. So we couldn't get screws out, we couldn't get nails out, the ones that weren't stripped. So we ended up having to just rip parts of the subfloor out completely. Well, when you rip parts of the subfloor out, if it's particle board like this was, it doesn't break off cleanly, it tends to come off in chunks. And some of those chunks were still attached quite handedly to the support beams on the bottom of the house. So what did we do? Well, turns out one of the extra applications for this little claw hammer doohickey right here was to take the back claw part of it and literally beat the individual freaking molded bits of particle board out from under nails so that we could then nail the nails down to create a flat surface to put new floor over. That hammer was not designed for removing particle board that was swollen up with mold. But when you've only got a handful of tools on hand, and you can only afford a handful of generalized tools instead of a bunch of specialized ones, turns out, even if its intended use was not for a particular thing, you can make that tool do other things, and it can be damn good at that job. Now, why am I saying this? Well, because I'm assuming that this video is going to be about the tool's purpose. The purpose of my penis is to impregnate. That's going to be where it goes here, right? So if that's going to be the general way this video is going to go, well, we've already spent 5 minutes explaining why that's dumb.
Myself. He would explain to me what they did by describing what they were for. Everything that's created has a purpose. Jackhammers are for breaking up rock or pavement, YouTube is for sharing and watching videos, and a refrigerator is for keeping food cool. The same principle applies to sex.
Okay, so
the only way for us to know how we should act sexually towards others is to first answer the question, what is sex for?
Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. But I want to go ahead, before it goes any further, and point out the fact that every tool they listed there can have a myriad of extra purposes. A jackhammer can be used in self-defense by swinging it wildly at somebody's head. Not the intended purpose of the tool, but it could save your life. YouTube is meant for sharing videos and putting up videos, but it can also be used as a research tool, a research mechanism, not just watching videos on YouTube for research, but the process of creating a video can end up teaching you something. Not just about video creation, but also if you're researching a subject to make a video as if you were doing a presentation in school, this right here is your time to learn. That is not the purpose of YouTube, but it is a secondary thing that it can be used for. And if you don't care about sharing your videos to YouTube, you just want to throw them up there so that you have them archived for your own personal use, then you're not sharing videos anymore. You're just utilizing YouTube as an archiving service, and then, by extension of that, increasing your personal knowledge and using the archive to show each presentation that you've built after gaining that knowledge. These are different purposes for these tools. Why does this matter? Well,
and a refrigerator is for keeping food cool.
And just going to go ahead and point out here, not always food, sometimes bodies.
The same principle applies to sex. The only way for us to know how we should act sexually towards others is to first answer the question, what is sex for? Once we know what sex is for, we can know how to experience it as God intended for it to be experienced.
Okay.
So the next time someone asks you why Christians care so much about sex, explain that it's because God created sex for 3 important purposes.
All right, so God invented sex for procreation. God invented sex to create oneness between 2 people. God invented sex to point to the union we'll have with him in heaven. Can we have a conversation about consent for a moment here? Can you consent to the union between yourself and God in heaven? Because if you can't say no, then by virtue of not being able to say no, your saying yes doesn't matter. Does that make God rapey? In this particular build, in this particular version of an argument? But, okay, so sex for procreation, sex to create oneness between 2 people, God invented sex to point to the union we'll have between him and heaven. Okay, so let's go ahead and point out that if I'm polyamorous, which I am, and I see sex as a way for me to express love for my partner, or for my partner to express love to me, as I do, then wouldn't it then follow that any amount of partners, that sex can be used to create oneness between us? And likely, most of us are not wanting sex specifically for procreation because we're going in with the primary purpose of creating oneness between us. And if none of us are Christian, then we don't care about that third one. But can that same oneness happen between a gay couple? Yes. Can it happen between a trans couple? Yes. Can it happen between anybody? Yeah. But I'm sure that they will clarify.
First, God invented sex for procreation. Sex makes babies. Right at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 1, God creates humans as male and female and tells them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it.
An apologetic that has been used to FARC with the climate for ages. But I'd also like to point out that the idea that you have to be fruitful and multiply, let's be a biblical scholar for a moment here, right? Let's look at this through the lens that a scholar would. During the early age of man, if we were to actually take, let's grant that the Bible is true for a moment. Grant that the Pentateuch was written by Moses, and so Moses is having to give reasons why each of these things are built the way they are. During this earlier age, it made more sense to have more babies because they died more often. You might live to the ripe old age of 31 if you're lucky, and you might have 1 of 10 kids survive, if you're lucky. Being fruitful and multiplying was the only way to maintain a population because so much of your population was dying so often. That is not the case anymore. In fact, actually, when the Bible talks about this in Leviticus, one of the 6 or so translations you can find for Leviticus, because it can be about pedastry, it can be about multiple different things, but even if you take Leviticus at its heart, the verses that talk about homosexuality being a sin, it is within the context of the world that they were living in. The context of a world where if a man was not procreating, then he was not doing one of his duties to their tribe, because their tribe would not survive without mass procreation. Period. End of story. Now, it has been used by Christians since then to argue that homosexuality is a sin, but at the end of the day, the context that these happened, if we were granting that all of it's true, if we grant that, the context in which this stuff was written is that they needed bigger populations. So of course they focused on that. But we don't have that problem now. So we don't need to focus on it now. This is the same reason why they had arguments against seafood. People were known to get sick off of it, so it became a sin to eat seafood, because it prevented people from getting themselves sick and further destroying their populations.
This is both a blessing from God and a command. That's right, having sex and making babies is actually a command. Sex is...
Yes, and again, if we grant that it was a command to a specific people who desperately needed to have lots of sex so that they could survive. Because again, the ripe old age of 31 was about your peak.
It's a procreative act.
This is true even when a child does not result. Some couples aren't able to have kids, yet when they are sexually active, their bodies unite in a way that is oriented toward procreation.
Okay, so does this mean that a couple should not engage in oral sex, should not engage in anal sex, should not engage in tit funking, should not engage... I could go on and on. You know what? Should not engage in rim jobbing. Should not engage in... And if you guys really want me to continue, I will, but I really want YouTube to be able to, monetize this video, so I don't know if I can. But by this logic, because sex, if you're engaging in the action that should result in procreation if everything was lined up properly, then that's the action you should be in all times. This necessarily means that other forms of sexual activity that do not involve strict penetration shouldn't be engaged in.
Even if the woman doesn't become pregnant in that act. Because sex has the potential to create new life, it is one of the most powerful acts that human beings can do.
I just thought about it. Growlith, shoosh. You've already been outside. You've already been out. But I just thought about this. Now, this is going to be kind of graphic, but does this mean that a couple can technically engage in anal sex so long as the female is laying in such a way that the dribble will then make it in and impregnate her. Is that the way? Is that the only way in which they'll be allowed to do that? I just realized that there are other ways in which these different types of sex can lead to that. Is it only okay for oral as long as they start like copiously shoving the ice cream in themselves afterwards? Is that... I know it's gross. I know it's gross to think about, but we have to ask ourselves these questions when we're dealing with a topic as interesting as this one.
This means that sex is a means to a greater end. It is not just
That end is orgasm. And it is great.
an end in and of itself, as it is often treated today.
Second, God invented sex to create oneness between two people.
Okay.
One of the most powerful aspects of sex is its ability to bond people together. Genesis 2:24 says that a man should leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. When a couple has sex, something changes in their relationship. They have entered into a deeper unity that is not only spiritual, but also emotional, relational, and even biochemical.
Okay, so the biochemical argument. This one, I've heard versions of this where it's like the man deposits his DNA in you and that DNA is in you forever, and the people who believe that are fucking stupid. But I want to go ahead and point out that this argument necessarily says that if you're asexual, you will never be able to experience a relationship as deep as people who fuck. That's basically what it argues. Or let's say you're too old, you're impotent, and you've never been able to have a functional relationship with somebody who you've had sex with. You have a deeper emotional connection with somebody later, but now that is completely and totally downplayed. Because somebody else who can have sex has a deeper, more emotional relationship now, by this definition. This seems needlessly exclusionary. More needlessly exclusionary than Christianity usually is.
Even after the physical act of sex, there's a degree of unity that remains, and it's designed to be lifelong.
I want to point out that when you say that after having sex you're designed to be lifelong partners, if you two are incompatible sexually and you didn't know beforehand, this type of thinking basically binds you to somebody else, and you might end up with somebody you're sexually incompatible with, which can lead to massive problems down the road. Let's say that you have two people who are monogamous, so the answer to their problem cannot necessarily be find a partner who can help. You have two people who are monogamous. One person has an incredibly high libido and super strong attraction. And one person is ace and does not realize it. They're asexual. They don't get off. They can't feel anything. They don't have any incentive or motivation to engage in sexual activity. They have no libido either. These two people get together and they have sex for the first time. And over a year or so, the ace person slowly starts to realize that they can't do this. They shouldn't do this. This isn't them. But they have in their mind that this is a bond for life. I have to deal with this. So even as they get to the point where they no longer really want the relationship that they're in, they no longer really want the sexual activity that they're in, because of this thinking, that sex has binded her or him or whoever into this relationship, and they are no longer able to leave without the pressure of this on them. There's already enough societal pressure against breakups to begin with. This makes it so much worse.
God created sex to be both an expression of and a vehicle for giving the other person your whole self.
Now imagine you're in a relationship with somebody and they have sex with you. They are giving you their whole self. But when you need help financially, they're not there. When you need help around the house, they're not there. When you need help emotionally, they're not there. You end up having a child and they ditch you. Did this person really give you their whole self? No. No, you just fucked. They didn't give you their whole self. This idea that having sex is giving your whole self to somebody. It's very romantic, but it's romantic in the same way that Disney movies are romantic, like old school Disney movies. Where, yeah, the idea that Aladdin and Jasmine would get together and live happily ever after, it's wonderful, but then you think about it as an adult and go, well, as romantic as that is, they've only known each other for a single day and their relationship was predicated on a lie. Wait. It's almost as if these types of infantilized romantic ideas behind sex diminish its value for people later because they end up having this super romanticized idea about it and end up either getting trapped in abusive situations or trapped in non-functional situations for themselves because they're too busy trying to live out this particular, at this point, a fantasy. Now, for some people, this may work. For some people, this could work perfectly fine. I know for me, this stuff kind of works for me, at least in some sense. I'm Demi. I already have to be attracted to somebody's personality. I have to be attracted to them as a person before physical attraction even starts factoring into the matter. But even then, if this person's not helping me out, not helping me grow, not helping me function as a human being, if they're actively hindering me, are they really giving me their whole self? I don't think so. And if I was doing the same, if I was having sex with somebody, but I wouldn't give them the time of day, I wouldn't play games with them, I wouldn't engage in activities they wanted to do, I wouldn't watch stuff with them, am I giving them my whole self? No. I'm giving them pieces parts. Dribbles, as you would say.
It's designed to help a man and a woman bond together for life. Third, God invented sex to point to the union we'll have with him in heaven.
That's where
In
things get a little
Ephesians
gross.
5, the Apostle Paul tells us that marriage has existed since creation to point us toward the union between Christ and the church.
Now, I want to go ahead and point out some of the issues with that. We've gone over enough biblical gender roles, right, to know where this argument necessarily leads. What is the union between Christ and church? Depending on the Christian, this union can be one where Christ has dominant authority over the church, or one where it is a more even-handed approach. But for a lot of Christians, this Christ is Lord, therefore Christ dominates the church, therefore the church should do what they can to serve Christ, because he's already served them enough by taking his 3-day vacation. This necessarily leads to a really, really fucked up power dynamic between the idea of Christ and the idea of the church. And if you are going to model your relationship after the relationship that Christ has with his church, all of the same issues present themselves. But now they might be a little worse. Because if your relationship with Christ is the same as, if your relationship with Christ as the church is the same as your relationship with your husband as the wife, now you can't question your husband. Now, your husband can punish you with anything up to and including hellfire for your disloyalty. Now, your husband can beat you, can punish you, can do all these horrible things. And if you don't think he can, then I would highly suggest you watch any of the videos that we've done on biblical gender roles where these arguments have been made exactly in favor of being able to beat your wife, of being able to punish them, of being able to chastise them. If you don't believe that people have used that argument for those ends before, I welcome you to the internet, where bad ideas live here like mold on the walls of my house, and unlike the internet, I'm not able to burn it with a flamethrower.
At the very beginning of the Bible, there's a wedding between Adam and Eve. And at the very end of the Bible, we're told of a wedding that is going to happen.
When did they have a wedding? When did that happen? Because the way I remember the story, now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a part that I do not remember. But the story of Adam and Eve, for me, was always Adam tried to fuck all the animals, realized that he wasn't compatible with any of them, so God said, okay, let me rip your rib out and make you a woman out of it. I made you out of dust, and before you come dust, I want you to come in her. And then they got in their relationship. Adam got tricked by Eve, which means their relationship is also predicated on lies. Great. All the Disney theming is happening here. And then God says, well, now that you guys have fucked up, you're out of the garden, but let me introduce you to this thing called barbecue, and kills a lamb right in front of them, and then rips off its pelt, throws the bloody pelt carcass on them, and goes, this is what clothes are, now eat the flesh, that's what food is now. And then they have 2 kids, and then one of the kids kills the other, and then a family gets started somehow, and the people of Nod happen somewhere along the lines. But where the fuck was the wedding and all that? I don't remember the wedding. When did that happen? Where was Lilith? How did she feel about all that? But, regardless, I guess we'll just continue.
Happen between Christ, who is the groom, and the church, who is the bride.
Which necessarily would mean an abusive relationship, because the power dynamics are so thoroughly shifted in Christ's favor that he can do anything and the bride can do nothing.
Human marriage was designed to be a signpost that points us to the greater union that Christians will have with Christ in heaven. As we saw earlier, the one flesh union of a man and a woman is a bond that entails an emotional, relational, spiritual, and physical element.
And all of that can exist in a gay relationship or a poly relationship. But, you know.
When people focus merely on the physical element, they miss the deeper unity, that intimate connection that occurs between 2 people in the act of sex. It is this kind of holistic union that foreshadows the kind of greater union we will have with God in heaven.
Yeah, no. So that just tells me that not only do you want relationships on Earth to have super unbalanced power dynamics and be abusive, or have the opening for abuse, you also want those types of relationships forever without consent. I'll pass, thanks.
As wonderful as it is, sex only anticipates the deeper fulfillment that all believers will experience with God in heaven. It's foreshadowing something far greater that's still coming.
All right. Okay, so baby, did you enjoy tonight? We had a great time together. But you know, no matter how many times I pumped you full of my love juice, and no matter how many times you screamed, you're gonna scream a hell of a lot harder when Jesus comes again. That's what I read from that. That is exactly what I read from that. And I feel really disturbed. Really disturbed. It is a gross situation to picture. Just think about it. No matter how good your relationship is with your spouse, it will never be as relationship as, you know what? Here, the perfect way to do it. The virgin earthly relationship versus the Chad godly relationship. That's what I got out of that. That's what I got out of that. Of course there's a war in Bossing Say. Someone on their production team has to know how this all sounds, right? There's got to be someone. There's got to be someone on their production team that caught that and just went, wait, hold on. Doesn't this sound a little bit like God's kind of rapey? I'm confused. Yeah. Things are weird. This video was weird. I feel weird. Do you guys feel weird? Because I feel weird. Someone cut the deep voice and posted as is. Go ahead, do it. Cut that right there. Cut the deep voice and send it to an animator. All right, that said, if you guys enjoyed that, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Please share it with friends if you enjoyed. Please go to my Patreon if you want to support what I do. Past that, thank you for watching.